In this video, I'm going to be talking about AQA English Language, Paper 2, Question 4, the infamous Writer's Perspectives question, which I think students over the last 10 years at least have always found a bit tricky. So the aim of this video, as has always been the case with the videos that I create, is to break things down into separate components to appreciate what to do in order to satisfy the mark scheme as fully as possible. I'm going to be using the insomnia paper for this. So two extracts. One of them is 19th century, the other one is not, with two writers who are expressing their varying views and perspectives about not being able to get enough sleep. So I'll put the links to those extracts below in the description box. Before we get to that specific extract as practice, let's just remind ourselves then of the approach. So because this is worth 16 marks and it's designed to be a slightly longer extended response, it means that the examiner is expecting you to do more, essentially. So that's why it's worth more marks. They're assessing more things. So this is the cycle that I often say to students that they need to be following in order to get all the information that they need in order to do this task effectively. So of course you have to read both extracts, that's a given. But it's then what do you do with that? So the next thing you need to do once you have read the extracts is to highlight or underline words and phrases that you think you could imply their attitudes or their perspectives from what they're saying. Once you have highlighted those quotes, you then need to think about, well, what words would I use to describe their attitudes? I'll do that in a second. Look at what you've highlighted as well. What methods are used? So you need to think about writers' methods. So it could be language, tone, structure, or narrative viewpoint. And then the most important thing I would argue is the evaluate box, which is why do they have these views? What has happened to them? Why are they expressing these kind of views? What are they feeling? And when you're talking about writers' feelings, you're talking essentially about their perspectives. So that is the process that students need to follow with paper 2, question 4. Now, I have heard teachers say in the past that rather than getting students to highlight specific quotes, they get students to highlight any quote and then try and work out the feelings once they've randomly picked those quotes. So there are perhaps a number of ways that you can approach this task, but the most important thing is you talk about both extracts, both writers, and you explain what their perspectives are. Remember, there is a difference between paper 2, question 2, the summary question, and paper 2, question 4, the viewpoint question. This one is asking you to think about what the writers think and feel, rather than just give a simple summary of something in both extracts. Okay, so in terms of the attitude words, I mean adjectives like this. So these are all adjectives that describe how somebody might be feeling, or they would describe how somebody, or they would describe somebody's perspective. So somebody could have a revolted, disappointed, hopeful, overjoyed, outraged attitude, for example. So you would also use some of these words in your answer to make it very clear that you are talking about their attitudes. And because this is a comparison task, it might mean that they have very different attitudes about the topic that they are talking about. So having some of these words in your head ready to use is quite useful. And I would not want students really to use positive or negative because, as you can see, those words are quite broad and general. They could be interpreted in numerous different ways, which which aren't specific enough to be of grade 4 standard. So in order to get above a grade 4, students need to be as concise and specific as possible. So this is the question. Compare how the writers convey their different feelings and perspectives on their experiences of sleep and sleeplessness. And I've highlighted that in yellow because that is effectively what you're talking about. Any evidence at all which is to do with their relationship with sleep or the lack of it, as the case may be. You've then also got the bullet points underneath, which pretty much always stay the same. The top bullet point changes based on the question focus, but the second bullet point always mentions methods, and the third bullet point always reminds you to make references to the text, to both texts. So to be taking bits of writing quotes from both of them. Methods, of course, here means language, structure, tone, etc. So you have to also tie in how these perspectives and feelings are conveyed to us. Okay, I've also just copied and pasted here the bottom of the mark scheme, which I found interesting, because sometimes students have a lot of questions about what if I only talk about one text, what if I only talk about this text, etc. So you can see that in order to get level 3 or above, you have to talk about both. If you were only to talk about one text, they would cap you at either 6 marks or 2 marks. So that's why it's important to make sure that you do talk about both texts. Okay, and some bullet points there as to what you could think about in order to help prompt you. So what you might want to do is have those bullet points in front of you as you're reading the extracts and think about what the answers to these prompts might be in each of the extracts. I'm not going to read the extracts in this video because it takes time, and I'm going to put a link to them underneath so you can click on those. So I'm just going to go straight now to the point where you've read them and you're ready to now start thinking about ideas. Okay, so as with all comparison questions, I usually use tables. Frequent viewers of my videos will know that. And the reason I use a table is because I want students to see that we've got two sides of the story, and therefore we've got to take information from both sides of the table. So we have Akbar and Fern here, two ladies who are both expressing particular attitudes and perspectives about sleep or the lack of it. So one of the things that Arafa Akbar says is she clung on from childhood and progressively beat me down. So this is describing the lack of sleep, insomnia. It clung on from childhood and progressively beat me down. So we've got some methods there in green: clung, beat, and the fact it's quite a personal first person perspective, which means it's quite honest. So with that quote in blue, I'm immediately starting to think about the methods. In red, I've got the attitude words. She has a defeated, tormented, and anxious perspective, or she feels those things. She feels defeated. She feels tormented. She feels anxious. And in pink, I've got how we might want to expand the why. So insomnia wouldn't let her go. It has long-lasting impacts. She's suffered with it for many years, and she realizes that it's quite hard to treat on her own. She's going to have to seek expert help. So that would be potentially half a paragraph or one paragraph on source A. The second quote could be, and these are not, the only quotes from it, you could pick several from it to help understand her feelings. But she says that she has sore eyes, itchy skin, and a high-pitched sense of mental hysteria. So she's worried, distressed, victimized, and helpless. Those, again, the attitude or feelings words in red. Underneath, we've got a lot of methods here. So we've got a list of 3. We've also technically known as a tricolon. And we've got a couple of adjectives and the noun hysteria and what those words mean in brackets. So in terms of connotations or the analysis of these methods, you could tie that in as well to your answer. And then again in pink, how you would expand the fact that she is having both physical and mental health problems because of this lack of sleep. Obviously, a lack of sleep makes us all feel woozy and a bit disorientated. And it's having a negative impact on her day-to-day life, which she's probably quite frustrated with now because it's been many, many years of similar feelings. So you're comparing source A with source B. So Fanny Fern has a more optimistic attitude or kind of perspective. And there's also a sense that she's using her time more wisely to try and help herself get to sleep. So she says that she, for example, will get up, strike a light and read. Second person, so almost speaking directly to us. And it's also that blue quote is a declarative sentence. It's written as a statement of fact. So in terms of how to expand that, the why, lack of sleep doesn't pose the same barriers to her as it does to Akbar. She's happy enough to read, do something productive at least to help settle her mind, calm down her thoughts maybe. And she has the ability to focus on reading. So she doesn't have that same hysteria or panic that the writer of source A has. And then you could finish off with your second point for source B, saying that Fanny Fern has a humorous, comic, or reassured attitude or perspective. She says things like 4 o'clock, gracious, and she mentions coffee and rolls that she's eating in the morning for breakfast. Exclamative sentence there, quite humorous maybe with the exclamation marks. And you could also say the method here is almost like a monologue. It's as if she's speaking to herself about the events of the night, but she's not taking it that seriously because by waking up in the morning, she knows that it was all okay in the end anyway. So she's not going to get too worried if it takes her a bit longer to get to sleep. Whereas the writer of source A seems almost crippled or paralyzed by her fear of not getting enough sleep. So, source B, the writer is finding humour in the situation. She's not overly concerned. She knows that she falls asleep eventually and she's ready to have breakfast and start her day. So she's reassured by the fact that she knows she will nod off eventually. So you can see, and this is what I mean by breaking it down, and I'm a big fan of colour coding as well. We have the attitudes or the feelings or the perspectives in red, the quotes in blue, the methods in green, and the expanding of our points in pink. And all of that essentially fits together in your answer. So you can see that the reason why this is at a 16 is because of the sheer amount of stuff that the examiner is looking at in terms of the mark scheme. Okay, so the final thing I'll show you is how this might all fit together in a response. So I've taken 2 of those points in that table. The methods here are in red, the evidence is in green, and the attitudes or feelings words are in yellow. And around it is kind of the expanding of the ideas. Notice that there's not a lot of green here because quotes always work best when they are short and concise. I've actually done a separate video about how to use quotes, about them being short and essentially not copying long chunks out from the extracts, which waste time and doesn't get you any marks. So it's important to be short, concise, and judicious. So it says both writers convey different perspectives and feelings about their sleeplessness. In source A, Akbar uses a first-person perspective to speak honestly and personally about her experiences. She comes across as defeated and tormented by her lack of sleep, and how all, that should say, let me just change that now, how all the things she tried failed to work. She also describes how she has been plagued by insomnia since childhood. She uses the verb clung to describe how insomnia wouldn't let her go and has had a firm grip on her for several years, suggesting that the writer has personified insomnia as a bully and tormentor that deeply affects her life. The verb beat makes it seem like insomnia is an enemy and physically attacking her. Akbar mentions how a lack of sleep has long-lasting impacts on her life and how she has suffered for many years, helpless without expert help, such as hypnosis or therapy. However, and that connective there is quite good because it shows that comparison. However, in source B, Fern presents herself as more optimistic and not seeing her lack of sleep as having the same level of serious repercussions. Her attitude comes across as humorous and comic when she uses exclamatives like gracious, suggesting she sees comedy in her situation and is taking some delight in telling the reader through a second person perspective where she gets the readers to place themselves in her situation. The fact that she wakes in the morning to enjoy coffee and rolls suggests she falls asleep eventually and can remember little of the events the night before, suggesting she is reassured that she will fall asleep eventually and can enjoy breakfast when morning comes. Now, that is perfectly fine as a full answer. You're going to get marks for that. If you can write more, then please do. But that would satisfy the requirement of the mark scheme. You have spoken about methods, and you have spoken about both texts, and you have spoken about their writers and their feelings and their perspectives. So clearly, you're answering the question. So that is an example of how all those components in that table begin to fit together. Okay, so with paper 2 question 4, you must always have a little voice in your head that says, what are the writers thinking and feeling and why? Okay, so this is not just a factual comparison for paper 2 question 2, like a summary. This is now a analysis of how the writers feel about whatever it is that they're talking about. Okay, so that's paper 2 question 4. all about writers' perspectives and attitudes and opinions, um, using the insomnia paper from a few years ago to help. Hopefully that was useful, and thank you for watching.